Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining my session. My name is Maggie Slowik, and I'm a research manager on the IDC Manufacturing Insights team. And today I would like to talk to you about supply chain resilience in the future, which is what we call the next normal, and how exactly technology can support you in this effort. So, what can you expect from this session? I will start to give you an overview of the impact the COVID-19 pandemic has had on European manufacturing companies and their supply chains, and give you a glimpse into the current state of resilience and why it's on the CXO agenda today more than ever before. And then I will go into the journey to recovery and the capabilities that companies need to develop for the next normal. And as technology plays a role in any digital transformation, I will also share with you our insights on which technologies will impact the digitization of the supply chain. And finally, I will provide you with a use case overview and some final considerations. So on the next slide, I would like to talk to you about European supply chains have been impacted by the pandemic very clearly. And what does it say about the current state of resilience? And that's the kind of question we will often get posed when we speak with the manufacturing community. So even though we've seen many local disruptions with a global impact in the past, COVID-19 is the first truly global disruption that we have seen in decades. And the crisis has clearly exposed manufacturing supply chains' lack of preparedness to deal with the outbreak and its very far reaching consequences. And according to the IDC supply chain survey that we fielded back in March and April, what you see here is a little glimpse of the survey. And you see that 84% of European manufacturers reported either a very severe supply chain disruption or the anticipation of that to happen. And we also investigated whether supply chain maturity made any difference in terms of impact experience. The results show that even manufacturing companies that classify themselves as having best in class supply chains were not necessarily spared from the COVID-19 crisis. They exhibited, yes, more resiliency, which is what is marked in green, and less uncertainty, which is what you see in orange, than their peers. However, and very worryingly so, the majority of manufacturing companies struggled with supply chain visibility, preventing them from assessing the full impact of the crisis that has had on their supply chains. And that is really not a surprise if you consider, as I already mentioned, the very far reaching consequences. If we move on to the next slide, you can see that undoubtedly manufacturing supply chains had to deal with a lot of challenges to deal with all at the same time. So, from the one end, we had a complete supply shock in the sense that people, factories, and companies stopped working for health and safety precautions, but also that customers, well, they stopped buying. So, you had this combined conglomeration of both supply and demand shock. And at the same time, people were prevented to go to the office, to the factory, to the warehouse. And that created an enormous pressure on companies to deliver. In fact, our research shows that only between 75 to 80% of the workforce are back in the factories, in the warehouses today. And that really shows that manufacturing companies are not yet back to full capacity as of today. And as of now, we're also seeing, as you are aware, a resurgence of cases. So this is going to be really the next normal to be dealing with this accelerated and continuous disruption. If it's not going to be COVID-19, it's going to be something else that's going to happen in the future sometime soon. So as a result, the crisis has really accelerated resilience to the top of the CXO agenda. And as we know from our COVID 19 impact survey, 55% of manufacturing companies will be making changes to their operational resilience strategies. So they have realized that they really have to make a change here. But there's also 17% that are still unsure yet on whether their level of operational resilience is really adequate enough to handle challenges. So there is work to be done, and companies need help with that, especially when it comes to the future. In our supply chain survey that I just talked about, we asked manufacturing companies across EMEA what current gaps are likely to be the most problematic in the future if not addressed. And number one was lack of supply chain visibility, flexibility, and resilience. Number two was lack of sufficient collaboration with external suppliers and customers. And number three, interestingly, was a lack of digital competencies. And to overcome those gaps, I have just pointed out, manufacturing supply chains have to undergo a mindset shift. So let's take a look if these strategic priorities for digital transformation are also shifting. And what you can see here is that efficiency and effectiveness is, or was at least until COVID-19, the number one strategic priority for digital transformation of the supply chain. But in 3 years' time, efficiency is going to slip to the bottom of the priority list, as you can see. Companies know that in the future, they need to focus on being resilient to external supply chain disruption if they want to stay relevant and survive. And they also want to seize the opportunity to become a supply chain disruptor rather than being disrupted. In fact, we're seeing quite a bit of appetite for that at the moment. So let's next take a closer look at the importance of resilience in the context of the future, or what we refer to as the next normal. And at IDC, we're using a framework that illustrates 5 stages to enterprise recovery to give an outlook on the business focus in the various economic climates companies will face along this journey. And we see different measures along these different stages of recovery, starting with companies taking measures to immediately respond to the crisis. Examples are, of course, health and safety measures to ensure that employees and workers are safe, such as social distancing or working from home concepts. Then, in the next phase, where the economy will be facing an economic slowdown, many companies will be in a cost optimization mode. And in a phase of recession, where revenues are expected to be in prolonged decline. And here, companies will be focusing on strengthening supply and business resilience to ensure their ability to continue operations despite potential further disruption that might impact their business negatively. In fact, they have to raise their process visibility and their demand sensing capability in this very critical time. And they really cannot afford to spend any money without having any immediate return on investment. And then, when returning to growth again, organizations will look into making targeted investments to gear up for the next normal, where they will make use of more technology and potentially operate in a whole new way. And in that next normal, the business mindset is the future enterprise, which is characterized by being able to manage not only unexpected events, such as global pandemics, but also consecutive events that will impact business and production operations on an ongoing basis. And the key 3 priorities or success factors that companies will be working towards to achieve this are the following. First, increasing operational resilience, agility, and efficiency. Second, customer centricity, meaning enhancing customer experience, which is about engaging with customers in a much more focused and comprehensive way than companies ever did in the past, creating more meaningful products and services, and therefore a more loyal customer base. And thirdly, in order to deliver the high value customer experience and also improve operational efficiency and resiliency, companies will also have to have a stronger focus on innovation and making that happen faster, as well as making it scalable. So, where are companies on their journey to this next normal? If we look at the next slide, we see that looking at companies across EMEA, we can see that the majority of companies are in a cost optimization mode. In fact, 34% if we look at the situation across all industries, and 42% if we look at manufacturing companies only. So you see a very strong focus on cost cutting, cost optimization. But recent results of ongoing COVID-19 impact surveys also show that companies are already preparing for the next phases on their road to recovery. Now, we're getting a lot of questions around how long will these phases last, and well, when will we hit the next normal? And clearly, there is no answer to that, because not every company is impacted in the same way by the COVID-19 crisis, or for that matter, any other crisis that we are yet to expect. It might well be that those companies that that companies are not at all in a cost optimization mode because they are in an industry that is doing very well despite an overall economic downturn. And I'm picking on the example of food and beverage producers, for example, that business is certainly booming right now. On the other hand, the European automotive industry has been very heavily impacted by the economic slowdown and is therefore very heavily focusing on significant cost cutting, as you can imagine. But whatever the pace is, the supply chain has become a very strategic focus on this road to recovery. And those companies that can build up supply chain resilience more quickly will be better positioned to have efficient, resilient, and agile operations, enabling them to deliver better products and services and therefore improve customer experience, regardless of any potential economic and environmental disruptions to come. So, increasing supply chain resilience is mission critical for becoming a future enterprise that is prepared for the next normal, where disruption occurs, as I said, at an accelerated pace. But over the course of the next 3 years, here is what European manufacturing supply chains will focus on specifically to cope with uncertainty. The key improvement focus areas are around inventory planning and optimization, and the optimization of manufacturing operations. Demand planning is also key. The crisis has shown that the past is not necessarily a predictor of the future. So, a bigger focus on analytics embedded technologies is needed, but we will come to that in a little bit again. So, you will also notice that control tower is currently at the bottom of this list, but we expect that to change due to rising demand for supply chain visibility, which is very important in order to handle any crisis. And speaking of visibility, one thing that you cannot see on this chart, but that I want to highlight regardless, is that companies that have invested in an ERP system reported, according to another survey, a lower impact of the crisis on their operations. And that is not a big surprise because ERP provides end to end visibility by organizing data in a consistent way across different business processes and enabling companies to dismantle silos and enable collaborative processes. On the next slide, I'm also already touched on the significance of technology here, but my point is that transformation cannot happen without technology. So, which are the key technologies impacting the digitization of the supply chain? On the next slide, I wanted to share with you some of our global research, which shows that there is a confirmed link between IT investments in digital as well as business results. So, what you see here is our global performance index analysis, which tracks growth metrics from 800 plus publicly traded global firms in manufacturing and retail. And the index shows that those companies that invest in digital initiatives outperform those companies that haven't made such investments at all. So you see the impact of both revenue as well as profit. In other words, companies that have made more digital technology investments, they can use these technologies in a better way to transform their processes and are as a result outperforming their competitors who are not as advanced because they don't have these technologies in place. And in fact, the best performing companies armed with a digital native culture, with tools and processes, they're speeding away from the rest by improving their operational efficiency, their cost, their agility, their time to market, and customer acquisition rates. And you see a polarization effect here. So a digital divide. Companies, these two types of groups of companies are definitely diverging into different directions. And we are expecting to see more of this sort of gap to happen over the years to come. And this strongly implies that there's a very positive impact of digital maturity on business performance KPIs. And what is also quite interesting to note on the next slide is that despite COVID-19, companies think quite positive about investments related to digital transformation. So actually, 47% of manufacturing companies in EMEA are willing to invest in technologies to close the gaps in the digital transformation. In other words, despite this crisis, they are not holding back their investments, but they're trying to seize this digital opportunity. Let's take a look at which specific technologies play a role in digitizing the supply chain. When we ask companies about the importance of digital technologies in 3 years' time, you will notice that many technologies will be important. but there are a few that I want to comment here. So you see at the top big data analytics topping the list, and this is really not a big surprise with companies trying to turn data into insights to improve their decision-making capabilities and get a better overview of their processes. But you also see artificial intelligence at the top, and that in combination with automation, which is a high priority for 20% already this year, this will help strengthen supply chain resilience. Think about detecting anomalies among your supplier base before there are any supply chain disruptions happening. The experiences from the COVID-19 crisis have shown that while typically you cannot necessarily avoid supply chain disruptions, you can certainly detect them much, much earlier so that you can react to them also much faster. Now, IoT will also play a big role, with the biggest perceived benefits being around shipment tracking and inventory availability, as well as warehousing. We also do see cloud adoption growing. In fact, we have recently seen very strong growth for supply planning, transportation management, and inventory management applications moving into the cloud. But we're also seeing a very strong cloud appetite for control towers and the digital twin. So while most digital technologies are of general importance for manufacturers, the remarkable exceptions are drones, and if you have noticed, AR, VR, clearly lagging behind. And that is interesting because all the marketing noise and hyper flexibility and resilience promises that these technologies carried pre-COVID times, um, they have probably just turned out to be fluff for the foreseeable future, and unless we are sort of seeing them picking up anytime soon. Um, I will also add that from our point of view, there are actually quite some interesting use cases for drones. For instance, locating and identifying goods or pallets in warehouses. So we do think there's going to be a strong potential for these technologies in the short to medium term. And with regard to augmented reality, there are also use cases where warehouse workers get their picking instructions displayed on smart glasses, so making them a lot faster, efficient, and certainly helping with training purposes as well. So, as I mentioned, we expect strong relevance for these technologies in the future, but of course, this will also depend on the development of technology, hardware, and usability, of course. And before I move on to the use cases, I'd like to make one more observation about data analytics, because data analytics, if we just take a look at the next slide, data analytics is a key pillar of digitizing the supply chain. In fact, 73% are comprehensively analyzing most of all their supply chain data. But when we asked manufacturers in EMEA how would they rate their analytics capability of their supply chain, almost 27% reported a lack of data analytics capabilities. And a lack of data analytics capabilities is slowing down supply chain digitization. So it's important to focus improvement in this area. Now, in the final part of my presentation, I wanted to give you an IDC overview of digital supply chain use cases along this transformation journey, because not everything can be done at the same time, right? So on the next slide, what we see is a positioning of potential use cases that relate to the digitization of the supply chain along the road to recovery. And this is only a very high level view, which applies most likely to a number of companies in various industries. So very high level here. And what is important to understand is that companies should always keep in mind to have the hands in the now and the eyes in the future, as we like to phrase it at IDC. Because companies should take appropriate measures now, but should always keep in mind to become future enterprises that are prepared for the next normal. However, prioritizing digital supply chain use cases will really differ on several factors, admittedly, such as industry, company size, and digital maturity. So it's not a one size fits all sort of approach. By the way, IDC also provides this sort of this sort of breakdown of use cases outside of the COVID-19 sort of horizon, because we are a strong believer of companies really breaking down the journey and not tackling everything at once, but sort of being guided by the big aspirational use cases in the future. And here are some final considerations which I would like to conclude my presentation with. First of all, make supply chain resilience an urgency and one that receives continuous priority. And I cannot really emphasize this enough. You need to put in place a strategic approach towards resilience and set in place the appropriate policies, processes, and technology tools. And you have to do this very, very quickly because, as I mentioned, disruption is going to happen at an accelerated pace. You also need to redefine your technology investments accordingly rather than just delaying them. I know a lot of businesses are very nervous in making significant investments at the time, but the business case for digitization is not any more clear than today. Now is really the time. When we speak with customers, we understand that they are accelerating their digital transformation journeys. So it's important not to sort of just freeze and not do anything at all, but rather than doing that, just plan sort of your use cases, reassess your investment roadmap to understand what can give you business value fast. That's important, fast business value. And finally, really be proactive with your IT vendors. Get their help and commitment on speeding up implementation and delivering shorter return on investment, as well as looking at new ways of working because you shouldn't be on this journey by yourself. So definitely make a sort of use of the wider ecosystem, your peers, your partners, as well as the vendor landscape. And with that, I'm going to conclude my presentation. And I thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed listening to what we consider supply chain resilience happening in the next normal. Thank you very much.